The journey was long and full of struggles, but we managed to get through an entire season of the Overwatch League somehow. Given how wild and unexpected life was, it feels good to know we got to the finish line this year. A lot happened along the way, and it's not very easy to digest, so I thought we could spend some time today reflecting on it all. Let's start from the beginning. So the first noteworthy thing we have to discuss is the league moving over to YouTube. A lot of people were negative about this right from the start, but I wanted to give it a chance before jumping to any sort of conclusion, and even to this day, I still don't mind the move that much. However, it goes without saying that the overall experience was shaky at times. The stream quality wasn't terrible or anything, but the amount of people tuning in was less than what we had seen on Twitch in the past, and part of the reason for that has to do with the lack of incentives for watching the stream. Establishing a token system this year took a good amount of time. YouTube doesn't have a drop system like Twitch, so Blizzard really was challenged here to try and find a new system, and needless to say, this upset some people. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure token drops were up and running right from the start of the inaugural season on Twitch. So needless to say, fans were rather accustomed to having these awards right from the start, and now that was suddenly taken away from them. It literally took over 3 months for them to get this new system implemented onto YouTube. To add insult to injury, the token drop system was inconsistent for a ton of people. I've seen a fair share of complaints from fans who can't seem to get any tokens regardless of whether they use the Overwatch League app or website. I myself had problems at times and ended up using Solomon's Gigabrain website to get the consistent token drops. The fact that some of us had to go through a third-party site just to get drops is a little sad on the league's part. To further take away from the fan experience, there was no longer a working League Pass system like we saw over on Twitch. A lot of people really enjoyed having the access to all POV so they could watch their favorite player or study somebody's gameplay during all of the matches. That's the biggest problem with the YouTube switch in year one at least. There was a lack of fan friendliness. I'm hoping Blizzard finds a way to get this up and running for Season 4. I think that would be a great way to bring back that total fan satisfaction. Everything else with YouTube in my opinion was fine though, I have no other gripes. While we're on the topic of possible negatives, let's get hero pools out of the way. After having the system in place for most of this year, I have mixed feelings on them. On one hand, I really did enjoy seeing the meta stay fresh. Sometimes the hero pools gave us some pretty awesome stuff, like when we saw Soldier make a triumphant return for that one week. That was a great week of Overwatch League. Not having to stick to something after being held hostage by goats for a year was a nice change. What I also liked was the whole mystery element behind it. It was a lot of fun to guess what certain hero bans would mean for a specific week. It was a segment that I enjoyed making part of my prediction videos when it was not super obvious what the meta would be. And come on, the whole drawing thing with Zoe, Custa, and Reinforce was quality content. Their on-camera antics and the anticipation of waiting for a character to get drawn made for a solid combination. However, these hero pools had their drawbacks. For one, they changed way too often, and that was always a concern for many people right from the beginning. This especially goes for when it was only 1 week long. Not only was it absurdly stressful on the coaches and players, but they had no time to perfect their craft. A lot of the time, teams would only figure out the meta like a day or two before their match, and it's not like they could continue practicing it after that game because the meta would be different right after it ended. Eventually, we extended the hero pools to 2 weeks, which felt a bit more reasonable, but still too short ultimately. It gave teams an extra week to practice, yeah, but you still can't really get that mastery of a meta like we saw before hero pools existed in only 2 weeks. The concept of hero pools is still something I'm willing to support, and I believe it could work at the Overwatch League level. I think it's a really cool idea. However, the time between each hero pool needs to increase. A month for each pool seems a lot more reasonable. That way we get the best of both worlds. The meta doesn't last for too long, but it gives everybody enough time to appear like they've mastered it. There's a way to get this system right. The league just hasn't found it yet. Overall, I would say hero pools did more bad than good, but I wouldn't consider them to be a total failure. Moving on to a more positive topic, let's talk about homestands. While they were extremely short-lived, they were great while they lasted. Opening week in particular was extremely hype. The New York and Dallas homestands in the same weekend was quite enjoyable. There was a lot of energy for opening week, and some of the games further enhanced the experience. The Toronto vs. Paris showdown and the Valiant getting a big win over Dallas were two of my personal favorites. Anyway, the next 4 weeks would bring much of the same, even though some of those weeks were a bit slow, like with the Philly homestand for example. But even so, the events during these weeks were still quite enjoyable. Think about the wild crowd of Philadelphia cheering on their boys in a tough game with the Justice, or the Outlaws getting an upset win over Toronto to give their fans something to smile about. And while this did not involve the home team, how could we possibly forget about the Boston and Houston Toilet Bowl that was unironically one of the best games of the year? This is what we were promised when the league first came into existence. We finally had a league that was spreading, and this was just the beginning. The anticipation to see games in China, Seoul, and Paris was enough to drive fans into hype overload. I, for one, was very much looking forward to the Seoul and Paris ones. Korea and France have two of the most passionate fan bases in Overwatch, so it was guaranteed to be electrifying. But then, COVID struck and home games with crowds were suddenly a distant memory. And as COVID continued to spread, it quickly became apparent they would not be coming back anytime soon, and that leads us to the online format, which I will admit had its ups and downs. Although the region split was very chaotic to keep up with at times, it really did help some of the Asian players feel a bit more comfortable within their environment. Player health and safety is something I'm all for, so this was great. However, having so many less teams in one region compared to the other got rid of a certain degree of competitive nature, I would say. The Shanghai Dragons were an amazing team, but they went unchallenged a lot this year simply because NA had more good teams. Think about it. They had two of the top three teams plus Florida and Paris who had their moments throughout the year. I really do wish a few more teams operated in Asia just to even things out a bit more. It's important to cut the league some slack though. This was literally the first time in league history that we had to change the formatting mid-season like this, so it's understandable to see bumps and hurdles along the way. Speaking of history, we definitely cannot forget about the collapse of the Vancouver Titans. Seeing the entire roster of a team plus their coaching all walk away is something we had never seen before at the Overwatch League level. Teams disbanding at lower levels was a bit more common, but never did I expect to see something like this happen at the Overwatch League level. It just felt so unlikely. Even when it doesn't work out, this type of stuff usually doesn't happen until the off-season. But the former runaway players were so unhappy that it simply could not wait. The disagreement between them and the management was too powerful at that point, and given the reactions of their former players on social media, it was pretty bad given how relieved they were to have escaped that nightmare. In a way, this kind of added extra excitement during the whole season because we all wanted to know where the former Vancouver players were going to sign. All of this in turn made the balance between both regions even worse though, as the Titans frantically put up a new roster in the middle of the season in North America, which was also a first. But still, I give a lot of credit to the league. A lot was going on all at once, but the league handled it as best as they possibly could. They were working around the clock constantly, and they did not have a lot of time either, so I appreciate their efforts greatly. And it's not like it was all that bad. There were some epic regional games and rivalries that formed, not to mention that monthly tournaments were implemented. I know that COVID kind of sucks and not having homestands was depressing, but the online format was kind of a blessing in disguise in some aspects. The constant flipping around of the schedule was a nightmare, but mid-season tournaments were a saving grace. They provided some of the best games and ratings of the year. It brought a more competitive edge to the regular season that gave teams and players incentives to try because of the paychecks and the potential better playoff seeding. I, for one, am very thankful for these tournaments because the regular season would have dragged on forever without them. Could you imagine what it would have been like if we stuck to the same schedule without any homestands? It would have been a bit repetitive. This especially goes for the non-traditional sports fans out there. People who strictly watch esports are used to the constant tournaments throughout a season. A lot of fans would have gotten bored. And I mean, we literally got some of the greatest matches of the year from these tournaments. Paris versus Philly and Shanghai versus Seoul are two of the greatest games in league history in my opinion. There were some pretty awesome upsets along the way too, like with Paris taking down the Shock and the Charge overthrowing Shanghai. We're talking instant classics. Then, of course, the road to the playoffs is another thing to think about, and this is where scheduling comes into play. It sucks, but multiple teams had to play catch-up. Teams who took long breaks like Seoul, Vancouver, and London had way less games on their resume compared to some of the others. That resulted in some stressful scheduling where these guys would have to play multiple games a week a few times in a row. It even got to the point where Seoul and London had to play all 3 games of the week at the end of the season. Other teams played catch-up too, but to a lesser extent. I'm sure this only added extra stress to the players and coaches who already had a lot of that on their plate to begin with. But thankfully, there was a little bit of balance thanks to the weeks off after the tournament. But this still doesn't really measure out to what these players were supposed to be getting rest-wise though. Generally speaking, homestands were supposed to make it so certain teams would get weeks off at a time. It was supposed to be spread out. This would help prevent burnout and give these players proper rest, unlike what we saw in seasons 1 and 2. It would make the regular season a bit more manageable. Instead, everybody was playing pretty much every single week. There was no time to rest because they had to make up for lost time. They had their games off while the league was making adjustments for the coronavirus. Only having that downtime for a short burst led to so much extra stress on the teams. I really do tip my hat off to everybody who competed this year. That was a lot to deal with. I can't even begin to comprehend the mental struggles of barely getting any time off. Words can't describe how much I respect and appreciate what they did. Now, of course, playoffs officially come around, and there's some more room for complaining. Because of the regional split and all of the craziness that happened this year, every single team was allowed to compete in the playoffs, unlike what we had in the previous year. I've expressed my opinion on this before, but I was not a huge fan of this. I don't find it very fair for the teams who deserved to be there to begin with. It was essentially a slap in the face for everybody who was top 12 or better. They worked hard all year and won so many hard-fought battles just to realize they would have made the playoffs regardless. Sure, they technically got perks for having a higher seed by selecting their opponents, but still, it sucks for the teams who were actually supposed to be there. The playoffs were supposed to have only 12 teams. Don't get me wrong, the whole opponent selection thing is really cool. I find that to be super entertaining, but it still does feel a little unfair to me. I wish the league went the route of only having the 12 teams compete. I'm sure they could have worked it out somehow. Sure, that means less games, but they could have substituted that with longer games by making all the series first to 4. Don't get me wrong, everything ended up working out okay. No team outside of the top 12 made the Final Four anyway, and I would be lying to you if I said I did not enjoy the Justice going on that crazy playoff run behind the heroics of Decay. However, they shouldn't have been in that position to begin with. The Justice were bad in the regular season. They won 4 games outside of regular season tournaments. That should not be rewarded with a playoff appearance. Like I said, everything worked out, but I'm just saying that it's not super fair. Then, of course, the finals come about, and the Shock answered the million-dollar question we had. Could the Shock win back-to-back titles? Well, yes. Yes, they could. And they did. Other notable storylines are, of course, Fleta winning League MVP, Carpe having a crazy comeback year, Alarm having a historic Rookie of the Year campaign, and Void having one of the most dominant seasons by a tank ever. In terms of teams, 4 different teams won some kind of tournament during the year, which was great, and many teams went far below or above their expectations, like with the Eternal, Valiant, Mayhem, NYXL, and Reign. Player retirements are something to reflect upon too. We have to talk about Sinatra, along with other well-known players retiring to go play a different game. Sinatra in particular was insane because he was literally coming off an MVP season along with a league championship, a World Cup gold medal, and a World Cup MVP. But he left all of that behind because he simply no longer had the passion to play Overwatch. While that is understandable, it certainly was shocking still. An MVP player who is also one of the best and most popular players in the world is suddenly gone. The only time I've ever seen something like this play out in the world of sports was when Michael Jordan did it after winning 3 straight championships. It was a shocking and sad moment, and it only got worse when people like Corey and Baby Bay joined Sinatra. It was hard to see so many likable faces go all at once, but we pressed onward and everything turned out just fine. To give some closing thoughts on this discussion, I really did enjoy Season 3. A lot of unexpected changes and surprises shook things up, but we managed to stay on the right course. I genuinely did find Season 3 fun to watch, and I liked making content on it even through all of the craziness. It was fun. Was this my favorite season though? No, not by a long shot. I don't think anything's ever going to compare to the experience of Season 1 for me, and I won't lie, this year was rather stressful on me too. There was a lot of news to cover, and the weekly predictions were exhausting at times because of the large quantity of games I had to cover all at once. It was a lot of hard work, but even so, it was all worth it, and I wouldn't trade it away for the world. You guys enjoyed the content so much that it motivated me to keep going no matter what happened. You guys enjoying the content is what matters the most to me at the end of the day. You guys deserve it. If I could help you stay sane even for just a few minutes during quarantine, then it's all worth it. Now I'm starting to blabber, so I'm just gonna wrap it up here. I hope you guys enjoyed this little reflection video of the 2020 season. Hopefully it inspired you to do some reflections of your own. If it did, let me know down in the comments. While you're at it, give this video a like and sub to the channel if you're new so you can stay up to date with all of my videos. And as always, thanks so much for watching this content. I really do appreciate your support. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.